And let's start with 18. Guys, a mediator is necessary because God's holy presence in verse 18. I want you to notice that a volcanic eruption, an earthquake, are being described. Both heaven and earth were involved in the spectacular display of God's holiness and God's holy presence descending upon Mount Sinai. Again, picture the scene as the people drew near and stood at the foot of the mountain. There was the most violent storm ever seen raging around that mountain. We also see in verse 16 the deep roar and rumbling of constant thunder, the brightest, sharpest, and most spectacular flash of lightning, no doubt flash every second or two in the continuous display of lights that we see in verse 16. There was no doubt a dense pitch black cloud hung over the mountain in verse 16. Fire and smoke blazed up out of the mountain as though blazing out of a huge fiery furnace in verse 18 that we see. That whole mountain was shaken and trembling violently that we see in verse 18 as well. I looked at verse 19. The continuous trumpet was growing louder and louder in verse 19. People were just as we would be if faced with the most violent thunderstorm, life-threatening earthquake, and a volcanic eruption. They were trembling and stricken with terrifying fear. But the experience was to teach them a valuable lesson that God is holy and righteous as well as good and loving.